Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the full-length debut album from Emma Blackery called Villains. So I'm not gonna lie, I was not expecting this would have the staying power it did to rise up my schedule. Because even on a slow week like this one, it can get a bit awkward talking about albums from fellow YouTubers who more likely than not will see this video at some point. And since there's a very good chance this might wind up in a reaction compilation somewhere, possibly even put together by her, I wanted to ensure I gave this my due diligence, especially as I've watched a fair number of her videos in the past. I've got a little bit of history with her, even if I wouldn't really call myself a fan. So, Emma Blackery, from the UK, she started on YouTube about a year before I did as a way to promote her music. She blew up considerably over the past several years, and while her collection of channels have gone through a number of permutations, the music has always been a consistent feature, even if I will freely admit a certain limited familiarity with her songs ahead of time. Now, in going back to revisit them, she hit something of a stride with a bratty pop-punk sound that got smoothed into a pop lane that feels very close to something that Paramore would have released around the turn of the decade. Now, I'll freely admit I've got issues with Paramore coming into that era and afterwards, and I was genuinely curious whether or not she would follow the same path they did for her independently released debut album. Apparently, she was going more electro-pop this time around, which could definitely work with the right production and if she had the hooks to back her up. Now, I'll freely admit I was a little skeptical, but hey, Troye Sivan had stuck the landing when I covered him just last week. I hope that Emma Blackery would be in the same boat here, so alright, how did Villains turn out? Well, honestly, a lot better than I expected. Yeah, I'll admit I had some low expectations here. I've seen entirely too many rock and punk leaning acts make the pop pivot and pitch a lot of their identity right out the window, and to her credit, Emma Blackery is a strong enough songwriter not to do that explicitly. But this project also gives me the impression that I've had the wrong comparison points to start with, because while there are some parallels to Hayley Williams' forced smile in the face of existential depression, Emma Blackery's got a lot closer to maybe October or Churches, or maybe even Lights in some of her darker, smarter, more detail-rich indie pop music. And as such, it is a promising debut album. Maybe not quite a great album, but better than I expected for sure, and definitely worth more attention than it's probably getting. And for a change of pace, we're gonna start off with the lyrics and content, because how this album is framed is absolutely its biggest selling point. To put it bluntly, the title of the album is not lying, and for the majority of this album, Emma Blackery is playing the villain. And this is not just slipping into bad girl titillation, for which Emma Blackery avoids altogether and painting a smaller but more realistic picture. And you can tell that she's comfortable wearing a darker image that invites the audience to see a more nuanced point of view that's not exactly going to be sympathetic. She'll be petty and dispassionate, jaded and honest to the point of cruelty. And while she's aware there's some vicious catharsis in embracing that image and persona, she's also acutely aware of the consequences both to her and to those around her. Taylor Swift's heel turn on Reputation has been described as an inspiration for her, but Emma Blackery is far more convincing, if only because she doesn't have to bear the same baggage and iconography that Taylor Swift had on that album, plus seeming way more self-aware here. Hell, by the time we get to Icarus, she tips her hand at the danger of instigating drama and overexposure. But even before then, there are clues about listless boredom and loneliness that's more reflective of the human reality of an assumed villainous state than any veneer of cool might be. And sure, some of it might have roots in being framed as the bad guy by exes, be it true or not, and there is an intense, self-destructive, almost paranoid desire to own that, if only just to control the narrative. But at the end of the day, you wind up having to live with yourself. The audience will eventually stop caring about your self-destruction, and you need to grapple with your own internal issues of what being the villain really means in your story. And that mature final question left open is a big step and a character arc in the album's narrative, especially on the concluding track, that is very well handled. I'll say it right here. So okay, Great thematic execution with a lot of nuance that I definitely appreciated, going into territory that is relatively unique for this brand of pop music, especially with Emma Blackery actually sounding so convincing playing that role. So what is holding this project back from real greatness? Well, this is where we get into the execution of these ideas, and really it's no one thing across the board, which is promising for a debut project, with the implication that there's only little things to be directly addressed here. I'm also going to set aside my personal preferences here when it comes comes to genre and delivery. I like the rougher rock aesthetic that Emma Blackery was using previously in terms of feeling a little bit more immediate and visceral, and hell, I grew up with that sound. But I understand why that might have had been set aside, and to be fair, the pop production does suit her voice, and the heavier multi-tracking actually works quite well. Hell, for the most part, I think the production is leaps and bounds most of what we get from other YouTube artists. Now that being said, even if the polished pop gloss was intentional for ironic juxtaposition, she's being framed as the villain, and even despite her kind of wanting to own it, it's not really a reality, hence the production not quite sounding grittier or darker. I do think this record could have had a little bit more kick and power to it, and it strikes me as a bit of a missed opportunity that songs did not get noisier or nastier, especially to match the language of a song like the title track. I take the distortion over the string sections, even if they kind of mostly fit for the fluttery song Icarus. And again, this can be a very tricky line to walk in balancing between being callous and icy and simultaneously pop-friendly and catchy. Even if October nailed this balance in Ultra Red the best with her embrace of more industrial sounds, she really couldn't even keep it consistent there. But I do think track sequencing could have helped a little bit in this regard with the sounds we do have, as there is some considerable backlash between the seething walls of guitars on the opening title track and the peppy, synth-inflected bounce of Dirt, even if I like the groove there. This also feeds into certain language choices that feel like more of a concession to a pop framework that's not quite as smart as the rest of Emma Blackery's writing. I'm actually okay with the pettiness and spilling the tea, but the letter callouts on Agenda and the very forced hook of Take Me Out, they don't really connect. And there's no way around certain comparisons between the slightly synthetic vocal filters and the sharper bite of the aggressive synths and the pulsating low end on songs like Fake Friends. It's very hard to avoid the comparison to Churches, although to Emma Blackery's credit, I'd take a considerable number of these songs over the swamped out mess that was Church's last album, most because the melodies remain fairly prominent and generally complement the pulsating grooves really quite well. Even if Petty feels like a gender-flipped version of Justin Bieber's Love Yourself with an EDM drop, I honestly prefer it coming from Blackery. She's got more vocal presence than he does, and following with the tight new wave grooves of Third Eye, though probably the best song here, the warping misty gloss of What I Felt With You, and the huge trap-inflected hook of Burn the Witch, it's a really solid run into a strong conclusion. The second half of this album really ends quite well. But at the end of the day, this is a tricky album to place in context in music right now, because unlike pop artists like Dua Lipa or Carly Rae Jepsen or Ray Morris, this is a project best appreciated as an album rather than as a collection of singles, which is not really common for artists in pop with this sound, even if I'd argue that she's considerably better than whatever the hell Halsey tries. Indeed, if there is a factor that would get me to recommend this project, it would be the writing, which I'd argue is head and shoulders above anything else on this project in terms of uniqueness and nuance. It can redeem compositions and production that are indeed solid, but don't really leap off the page in the same way, which is what holds her back from the territory of artists like Lorde or St. Vincent or Shura or even Carly Rae Jepsen. And that's kind of tough for Emma Blackery, because I think she'd sound a lot more comfortable both in her vocal delivery and with her style of writing in indie pop or indie rock or maybe even punk or emo. But those genres don't have the single-driven virality for which her production seems uniquely designed. But again, I promise I wouldn't try to recontextualize the sound and genre of the album, which isn't really fair for a perfectly solid pop release, and as such I'm giving it a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. At the very least, if you were disappointed by Churches or a slew of the other synth pop releases we've gotten in 2018 or even 2017, Emma Blackery, she makes a credible argument to where she should be in that field, and yeah, you know what? I respect that. So if you're curious, check this out. Pretty good. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm a little bit surprised this wound up on my schedule. Even more surprised that I actually kind of liked it. But hey, if you want to buy the record, links down there below. And I got the poll up there if you guys are curious, and all the Emma Blackery fans are going to tell me how wrong I am. Have fun with that. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in supporting this channel or helping add records to my schedule so I cover other things, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote for my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. If you want to see my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.